What comes first, the drawers or the case? Well, obviously the case comes first because you need some place to put the drawers. But really the drawers come first because you have to know how much they're going to hold and how you need to mount them before you can build the case. So really what comes first is thinking about the way that the case and the drawers work together.
Now, case construction and drawer construction are very much like box construction. And like boxes, you can make your drawers simple or complex. So the most important thing to decide is the amount of effort you want to put into building your drawers and hanging them.
Let me show you the simplest way. Here's a plywood box made with a simple rabbet joint at the corner, pinned from the side to resist the movement, the pull of the drawer when you open it up. And the bottom is glued onto the box, acting as a drawer runner as well as a bottom. So it serves a dual purpose. So it can run in these grooves cut into the side of the case and also act as your bottom.
So how are we going to make these pinned rabbets? Well, table saw or router, I'd say, but there are a few different ways to make them with each of these tools. Here are some drawer fronts, backs and sides I've cut out of some plywood. I set my blade height for just about half the thickness of the stock. Could be a little more or less. The depth of the cut will just affect the width of the drawer, not the integrity of the joint. Next, I set a stop for the shoulder cut, which should be just as wide as my stock is thick. If you use the plywood itself to set the stop, you don't have to worry about whether the ply came out of the factory a little too thick or thin on the day it was made. I cut the shoulder in a series of passes. With an 1/8 inch wide blade, this just takes a little time. Now this is too rough for a good joint, but here's a little trick. With the stop in place, you can move the piece back and forth across the top of the blade and smooth out those furrows. You may need to wet your fingers a bit to help them stick to the wood. And there you go. Another way to make this rabbet is to cut the shoulder and cheek separately. Here's the shoulder cut, just one clean cut on each end. Then away with the crosscut box, in with the fence, and I set up for the cheek cut. I set the blade to cut just a little below the height of the shoulder. I set my fence so that the blade will form the cheek just in line with the bottom of the shoulder cut. We'll first take a practice cut. I hold the work securely against a tenoning jig. It's got to stay vertical for this to be safe. Don't cut all the way through. Check your settings first. When they're right, you can make all of your cheek passes. Hold the jig tightly to the fence for each cut. Now a good sharp chisel will clean up any little bit of shoulder left in the corner. Cut vertically first, and then clean the joint up with a paring cut. A table-mounted router is an even speedier rabbeting tool. I've got a straight bit set up in this one. The bit height should be at about half the thickness of the stock. That'll put the cheek where you want it. To position the shoulder, I use the stock again as a gauge, setting the fence so that the stock lines up with the far edge of the bit here. Take a first pass to hug out some weight, and then make the final cut, holding the workpiece and a scrap backer board tightly against the fence. I cut the two pieces together to get a good wide bearing surface against the fence and to prevent tear out at the rear end of the rabbet. Before gluing up, I first dry clamp to avoid a mad dash in setting all these clamps. You need them for both directions and usually one across the diagonal to pull everything in square. The clamp locks help spread the pressure, and you can pull the clamps in about an hour or two after gluing. Be sure to support your drawer box in a vise for drilling. I'll set my pins in 3/8 of an inch from the edges and an inch apart, but you can really lay them out however you like. I've taped off the depth on my brad point bit at about 1 inch. Make sure you drill in at an angle here so that the bit doesn't nick the inside face of the drawer front or back. The masking tape will tell me exactly when I've gone to depth. Now I'll cut some dowel pins out of some 1/8 inch hardwood dowel. I mark them right on my bench hook. Then cut them about 1/2 inch too long. It's a little long, but 1.5 inches overall. Then I chamfer the ends just a bit so they'll ease into the holes. I use a toothpick for many things. They've taken the place of cigarettes in my life, but they're also wonderful glue appliers. Once that hammer sound changes, you know you're at full depth. Cut off the ends, coming close with a saw, and then cleaning up the rest with a good sharp chisel. See how the end grain of these dowel pins comes out looking much darker than the flat grain of the plywood? Go at it from 2 directions so you're sure you've got it flush, and you don't have to sand. Now the bottom. I use a spacer to help line me up on the sides. The overhang is about 1/8 of an inch. This, of course, fits into the grooves cut into the case. I glue around the edges. The glue stick keeps my fingers clean and spreads the glue pretty well too. I've lined up with the spacer again, and then I'll start to clamp. Make sure the box doesn't slip when you put that first clamp on. Check it with the spacer again. You'll need a bunch of clamps to work your way around the perimeter of the box. A little bit of squeeze out is what you're looking for. And make sure you clean that up. Here's an improvement over our bottom mount system, and perhaps at first it may seem like an aesthetic consideration, but the use of a face frame will cover up the edge of your case, your plywood case. This is useful especially in a larger case. It will also provide you with a little bit of trim room if you leave some extra wood here on your face frame for fitting an unsquare opening. And it also provides you with some aesthetic room to play. You can, change the size of these face frame members, perhaps put a detail on this edge. Gives you some alternatives there. Those are the plus sides of the face frame. Now, how do you mount a drawer in this system? Well, there are a couple of ways of doing it. First thing you have to remember is that the drawer is going to be smaller than your case. It's got to fit inside this face frame, so that's the first thing you have to remember. So we need some way to support the drawer box inside this opening here, and the simplest way is to mount a glide or runner in the center mount. It'll attach to the back of the face frame and to the back of the cabinet, and the drawer will run on that. You'll need a mating runner to ride along the runner that's in the case, and that's going to need some thickness, so you'll have to set the bottom of the drawer up in the drawer a little bit. The drawer will need to be deeper as well to provide space for this runner. This time we'll make a dado rabbit joint with the old quarter method. My dado blade package is set at 1/4 inch thick, 1/4 inch away from the fence, and 1/4 inch high. This single quarter setup is all I need to cut all the joints between the sides and drawer ends, as well as the groove for the bottom. It does require a steady hand throughout. I dado my 2 sides together for steadier bearing against the fence. First one end and then the other. Always make your cross grain cuts first. Now the groove for the drawer bottom. The dado rabbit has what you'd call integrity as a joint. Force on the front is transferred to the sides without danger of the joint pulling apart. It needs no pins because the drawer ends are completely captured in the sides. Take your time when you use a dado blade. It packs a wallop. Here's my setup for cutting the tongues. The taller fence provides better support when passing this piece vertically past the blade. Take it slow and steady. There's a tongue, there's a dado. And there's a tongue fitting into a dado. Very satisfying to see that groove wrap around inside the corner.
Good.
But be careful when fitting this joint. If it's too tight, you can snap that short grain right at the end of the drawer side. Okay, now back to that runner for the underside of the drawer. You could use a dado package here, but I'll just hog it out one kerf at a time. Then clean it up in a single pass with a 3/4 inch router bit. With the same bit, I open up the ends of the drawers, controlling tear out by lowering the drawer onto the bit at the entry and exit of the cut. This is going to be one of the mating runners that mounts into the case. I rough out a notch that almost fits over the lower part of the face frame. Smooth it with a sharp 3/4 inch chisel. Then gang up all 3 runners and make them perfect with a shoulder plate. Each case runner gets countersunk and drilled. The drawer runners are glued and screwed. Then I glide the case runners through just to make sure there are no snags. Now the trick is in positioning the case runner so that the drawer runs square in the case. Set things up so that they look just about right and screw down the rear end of the runner. Slide out the drawer so that you can sight down the opening right here. If the drawer and case are not quite parallel, just ooch the drawer a bit sideways on its loose runner, then pull it away and lock down the middle of the runner with the screw. Then the front. And presto, not a bad fit. The upper runners take a bit of planning because they'll be hanging in midair until you can attach them to the back of the case. Support them with blocks resting on the drawer beneath. Fit the drawer and screw the front of the runners to the face frame. I spring in little spacers to hold the rear of the runners in their correct side-to-side positions. Set the back in place with a couple of screws. And slide each drawer home carefully and check its alignment at the front. Run one screw through the back to lock in each runner. And oh yeah, get those drawers out somehow. Pull the drawers and start to plan your drawer fronts. Figure out how much overhang you'll want and cut your faces accordingly. Then mark the box fronts for screws. Support the drawer over your bench and drill all the way through. If you make the screw holes a bit oversized, you'll be able to adjust the position of the face. Using spacer blocks at the ends as a guide, mark the back of the drawer face with the screws. Then drill the drawer face, but not all the way through. Mount the face and check its fit to the face frame. Voila, drawers. These wood-on-wood
mounting systems we've been looking at are great for light-duty applications, but as the amount of stuff that you put in your drawer grows, you may run into friction problems. That's where you can gain a mechanical advantage by using metal drawer slides. Now these can provide you with full extension or three-quarter extensions. Some of them are self-closing. All of them have a built-in stop. There's a few things you need to pay attention to with a drawer slide. First of all, your drawer box needs to be smaller than the opening again. You need to have room for the drawer slide. It's a ½ inch. It's always a ½ inch. And there's a little bit of side-to-side slop. You also need to have a drawer face that's going to cover up your slides. That can either be inset, rabbited, or full overlay to the drawer face. And you need to mount this drawer so that it's square to the opening so your drawer comes out nicely.
And here's yet another way to make drawer joints with a router bit called a drawer lock bit, designed just for this job. Because a bit this large packs quite a wallop, you have to mount it in a router table. I'm going to set up my adjustable zero clearance fence with its dust collector and make sure the bit turns freely before I switch anything on. Now I sacrifice a bit of the fence to create a zero clearance around the bit for better support of the work. My router's spinning slowly at around 10,000 RPMs for this. I've rabbited away most of the waste on the table saw. As you can see, the drawer face will have a healthy rabbet to conceal the slides. Take your time moving right to left across the bit, into the rotation of the cutter. A backer piece helps steady the cut against the fence and prevents tear out at the back. The bit height is the crucial thing for the fit of this joint, and it takes some test cutting. But when it's right, this part of the groove in the drawer face has the same length as this part of the groove on the side. A simple way to think of it is, when you make your test cuts, raise the bit until this line and this line are the same length. Then just keep the same bit height for the sides. The fence setting for the side will affect the depth of the cut into the side, which of course affects the width of the drawer. That should of course be the inside case dimension minus the thickness of the two drawer glides. But you can go 1/16 of an inch less than that and still have no problem with the drawer slides. I hold the drawer side vertically, cutting the dado that engages the little tongue we've already cut into the face. That's how she goes when all's well. And this is how she don't go when the bit's set a little too high. Glue up requires careful preparation as always. You'll need to have your clamps and some gluing blocks ready to put pressure right on the joint where you need it. A little squeeze out is just right. Run your clamps in two directions to ensure the joint is pulling in snug. When all of them are in place, measure across the diagonals to see if it's square. And if you need to, run a clamp along the longer dimension to pull the drawer in square. Drawer slides run the gamut from the inexpensive self-closers I showed you earlier to these heavy-duty full-extension ball-bearing slides. These drawer slides are made to allow for a bit of side-to-side slop, so don't try to make them fit too tightly. The 1/16 inch shins will raise the drawer slightly to make a gap at the bottom, just about the same size as these 1/16 inch gaps at the sides. With the drawer face set just back of the edges of the case, pull out the drawer without disturbing the slide position, open up the slide carefully, and drill into one of the oversized holes that allows for front to back adjustment. Use a Vicks bit, a self-centering drill bit made for this job. God bless Mr. Vicks. Into the drawer side, drill into one of the holes that allows for vertical adjustment. Now you have two ways to adjust the fit of your drawer. Drive a couple of screws home and then check your fit. If it's a little off, loosen the appropriate screws. Make your adjustments and retighten. Be sure to lock the slides in place with screws in all those other holes once it's fitting right. And there we have a nice fit. From here, just build right on top of your first drawer. Use the same laminate shims to set the reveal between drawers. Set your drawer in place and away you go all the way up to the top. This is my box of handles. a repository, a storehouse of ideas, remnants, rejects, some great handles that I've used in past pieces. It's so useful to have these things around. That's a great pull, but it doesn't work here. Allows me to play with ideas and shapes. Some that work really well on other pieces, and some, that's a great top piece, but it doesn't work here. Not quite. This aluminum and ebony work well in another piece. It doesn't work here. Now, why didn't I think of this before? Simple, elegant. Simpler is always better, isn't it, huh?